technology is hard. All right. So for our next speaker, Jason Melo is joining us from nearForm. Jason is focused on open source software delivery for the enterprise market. He focuses on enabling cloud and digital transformation at nearForm and working with the enterprise clients of nearForm. His talk today is going to be talking about the Node.js maturity curve. Please help me in welcoming Jason.
Today, and thanks to TELUS for hosting us in this awesome space. So cool. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about Node.js and enterprise maturity and some of the patterns and the stories that we see around that. So in the digital battle, right, the big will not beat the small anymore. It's more about that the fast will beat the slow. So we look at Node.js, open source, and a lot of kind of event-driven approaches that I'll be touching on to building your digital systems. This will not only deliver the tools that needed to compete alongside the digital giants, but will also be a key enabler to drive value to your business partners, right? Because it's not just about the technology, it's about how do I enable my business partners so that the rest of the business can run really fast and hopefully kind of start to conquer the world. Right, so Node.js, it's really an ecosystem. It's this impressive kind of heterogeneous world where not only JavaScript and web standards come together, but also things like edge computing, right? Serverless, mobile, IoT, a bunch of different use cases. And it's supported really by the largest open source community in the world. So that's super powerful. And you can even get into things like systems level development, right? We had I don't know if you guys have been looking at WebAssembly recently, and some of the kind of the progress that's being made there to bring in things like Rust and other kind of systems level programming. So Node is just starting to kind of grow in a lot of different kind of directions and angles. And you even have a lot of kind of machine learning use cases with things like TensorFlow.js, and even on the Node side, Python interoperability with a lot of kind of ML use cases. So Node's awesome. I love Node, and I've been building enterprise level systems with it since about 2010, starting in the financial services industry in New York. So a little bit about me. I focus on enterprise architecture and digital strategy at nearForm. I joined recently after leading architecture and digital strategy at ADP, the largest payroll and HR company in the world. And I was a co-founder of Lifion, which is our global platform, or ADP's global platform organization, where we developed arguably the largest JavaScript-based microservices platform in the world, all built on the public cloud. And with an organization that we built up from a handful of engineers to over 400 people in a real kind of large-scale digital transformation project in just about 2.5 years or so, from kind of start to current day. So part of my talk today will include some stories about how we went through those journeys and how nearForm specifically has helped these types of organizations accelerate and mature the enterprise strategies. So a little bit about nearForm before diving in. Who are nearForm and what do they know about Node.js, right? Why are we up here talking about this? So if you look at Node.js 10.0 that just dropped, nearForm is responsible for roughly right around 30% of the code of the commits that were released in Node 10. All of the major features in 10.0 outside of the V8 engine itself were led by nearFormers. And we're the largest organizational contributor in the Node.js project with a number of other ecosystem projects like Happy.js, Fastify, Pinot, AutoCannon, and a bunch of other tools that I'm sure some of you are using today. In fact, today we have here the release manager for Node 10. It was James Snell. He'll be speaking later on today, more specifically about what the Node.js core community is doing to improve reliability, stability, observability, and diagnostics within Node core. Awesome. So there's many steps in the journey to create a more mature and sustainable enterprise platform. I'll touch briefly on just 3 of these steps. There's many more above and many more down below. And these steps are both where the open source community and the Node.js project are making strides to address the needs of the enterprise to really kind of be able to grow up and service the digital enterprise. This is not a talk about security per se, but a lot of kind of the concepts, stories, strategies are part of kind of a greatly improved degree of cloud native security controls that you can kind of take those models further into, but not going to be touching on security. So with all of this, as I spoke about a little bit earlier, right, the focus should be on the business value and the outcomes that we can drive. We should not see organizational structures or technology implementations as the measure, but rather, what does the business get? How am I providing value to my business partners? I think this is the real transformational goal, building a rapid and ongoing engine of change. Right, digital is not about kind of arriving at a finish line and say, hey, we're done, we're a digital organization, awesome, right? It's about that ongoing engine of change through very deliberate culture, technology, people, and process, supporting not only your kind of core R&D efforts and IT services and needs, but also finance, security, legal, sales, compliance, marketing, operations, the entire business. It's really about matching that and partnering on all of those goals. So how does Node.js, the cloud, and open source come together to help us get there? I'll share a couple of customer stories where these approaches were applied, both kind of across more of the multinational corporations, global enterprises, as well as the smaller startup space. So let's dive in first with dependency management, kind of done at scale across a multi-domain organization. Okay. So without immutable artifacts and deterministic test targets, right, things that we can really lock down, you really have no chance of delivering a reliable system where you could rapidly validate and iterate with your customers. It's just too indeterminate. A recent development that we're starting to see emerge is open source vendors providing pluggable distribution models into their customers' systems in the form of runtime distributions, performance scanning, security and vulnerability scanning, as well as providing a trusted and immutable provenance, right? So that third-party assets into your company's supply chain can be fully vetted, and it's fully transparent in terms of what actually is in my system, how's it operating, what licenses are in there, what code is in my system, and doing that without really kind of engaging in a heavy-handed forensics activity every time, right? How do you just kind of emit that out so that the organization can consume it? I think as security organizations in the enterprise become more savvy into this space, and especially around kind of supply chains and whatnot, if it's not already happening already, we'll see this more from kind of a matter of, hey, here's good testability, here's good hygiene, and it will actually become a business requirement that we have to address and we have to meet. So a goal should be that whether or not you're doing container-based development, you should only accept immutable and 100% deterministic artifacts into your build pipeline, right? So some examples of that are, put Node.js into a container. Even if you're running a standalone or a monolithic application, you still get a ton of benefits by taking that approach. You lock down the state of your runtime build. You can create a continuous integration pipeline that deals with one construct, one kind of ubiquitous thing. I know how to ship containers, I know how to build my pipelines, and I know how to engage with my entire business to bring that to production. You create a full development to production parity dynamic where you can really achieve the ability to have distribution methods such as that are counter to things like software provisioning with tools like Ansible or VMware-based type approaches. These things are too indeterminate to really kind of be able to trust, have that check mark off, and move on to other challenges, right? Be able to kind of work on features, validate with your customers, and not worry too much about kind of the nuts and bolts of how your supply chain is coming together, okay? Locking down your distribution, your runtime, your dependencies, it's not sufficient to use your package.json file as a deterministic build artifact, right? That can change. You don't have control over the upstream of that. Instead, you package up your node modules directory. It's just one example of really kind of looking at where are all the different kind of ways that this can permutate and change, and being able to address that and lock it down so that you have that full confidence. Cataloging your dependencies, right? Saving all of your scan results, saving everything that's moving through your pipeline, and then really treating that as events that you emit out over something like a message queue. It's not just about data that you want to put onto an event queue. It's any kind of change events. It's anything that's kind of going through a supply chain, because then you can drive things like SOC 2 compliance reports, HIPAA regulations, commercial licensing conflicts, any kind of intellectual property protections that your organization cares about. You're able to kind of statically inspect that and have an answer almost immediately for the business, as opposed to having to take your R&D resources off of what they're doing to go through that activity of saying, what are we actually running? What's actually going on within our system? Okay. Sorry. Awesome. So the second step that was on kind of the three-step journey is about cross-functional events. And this is really kind of the meat of what I wanted to touch on here. Traditionally, we've thought about events in a pure data-driven, a lot of kind of CQRS style architectural patterns. However, anything and everything can and should be captured as an event. You don't know today what use cases will emerge in the future, and so this pattern becomes a really kind of strong enabler of having a very kind of high velocity digital strategy in your organization. I like to see this pattern. It kind of ties back into Node.js quite nicely for me anyway, is that I see this pattern as a reflection of JavaScript itself and the Node.js event model, where functions are hooked into event listeners, right? Extending usages without needing to refactor any upstream process execution, a reactive API built in from the start, and taking that model across your entire architecture. Okay. So this diagram is just a very kind of high-level view of the kinds of kind of events that we might want to emit and how we might start to kind of transact on those. So starting up in the top left, you can see. You can kind of imagine the differences between purely data write driven events and start incorporating any type of process execution, change request, customer transaction. All of these things are captured as events. After your business events have published into your message queue, you can then imagine the engines downstream that will consume these events. Your event handlers and your application state, those contain your read projections. They have your materialized views, query interfaces, BI, a lot of kind of the machine learning use cases that Ed from Conde was touching on. A lot of that can be driven through this kind of no pressure downstream engine approach that's really driven by events. If you're in an organization that is producing and consuming a large amount of data, this almost becomes kind of a necessary pattern to remove any kind of pressure that you see across your architecture. So what does this matter? It matters because the architecture is not prescriptive of technology implementation. It matches well with how cloud native workloads are built, on top of public cloud platforms like Azure or whatnot. But it also doesn't create more system pressure as you grow your functional capabilities. Okay, and it also allows you to scale your system as higher and higher demand comes in. There's no kind of one area where you may see kind of breakages or touch points. Each of kind of your domain silos within your architecture can be addressed with different scalability needs and different ways to operate that. So from a data and functional execution perspective, there's a single driving integration pattern. In the platform we developed that is event-driven, this was like pouring gasoline in our development velocity, especially in emerging areas. Use cases that we really weren't aware of yet. They were either more nascent or emerging. They were all able to be supported by essentially plugging in to this model. So I think that was really, really powerful. And through that, you can build systems like master data management, authorization, recommendation engines, workflow, and BPM. All off of the core distributed event queue while having zero performance impact. If we look out a bit further, and what's really happening today, it's that this really becomes a driver to uncover things like insights, right? How do you form insights? You form it through data. You form it through ingesting a lot of data, learning from that data, and providing insights back to your customers. Because as we move towards the world where we have voice as a user experience, where we have other types of interactions which are not kind of a person consuming a large application or a large kind of web page with a lot of information. I may be a manager, or maybe an executive in a company. I need a quick insight. I need something. I need the system to tell me how should I respond? How should I do what I need to do? And that comes from ingesting a lot of data and understanding system interactions, which I think event-driven architectures is kind of the key enabler to make that happen. Okay. So establishing an organizational vision allows you to embrace the change that's needed, right? Setting a compass for your culture while locking down. Oh, I think it's on the same slide. Yeah. The changes needed. Setting a compass for your culture while locking down your supply chain with predictability, governance, and embracing full stack event-driven architecture allowed us to create a digital platform. This was at ADP. Which not only scaled to service our customers, it also scaled in many dimensions and elastic ways to support the business, right? And one tangible example of this is where nearForm played a critical role with us was that we wanted to create a graph-based system to handle organizational and skills data, right? And you can imagine that this is, millions, if not tens of millions of people around the world, organizational structures that ranged anywhere from, a couple of hundred people to the scale of, millions in terms of the size of an organization, if you look at all their kind of contract work and full-time equivalents and whatnot. So in order to handle that size, the way that we built that system, it wouldn't work with traditional integration means, right? Or having a single database that would house all that information. It would simply fall over, and it also wouldn't kind of meet the different use cases that we needed to see in that type of a system. The graph was also set up to support things like authorization, process eligibility, and again, touching on insights. That was a key driver for that. So what we did was we landed on a distributed messaging queue as our system of record and the most upstream data aggregation point, while treating all other data stores or services downstream from that. And that really helped us kind of break open the architecture and kind of not have anything where we really painted ourselves into a corner. We could kind of have emerging use cases keep being built on top of and additive and keep on going. So that was really powerful. So it's fantastic, right? Yes, it actually is. The model allowed our clients to hydrate relational stores, graph databases, distributed caching strategies. We built our CDN caches through that model, as well as things like serverless process execution. When were we triggering functions? When were we working with different systems? And it really had nothing to do with whether we implemented it, kind of on-prem using our own tools or open source, or whether we did it out on the cloud. The model worked and the model was able to be applied, irregardless of any of those kind of technology choices. So think about your systems in this way, kind of interacting over asynchronous channels, very similar to the Node.js programming model. The control, I can control and be responsible for the performance and SLAs of my service, and I don't have to worry about, other teams that are adding on kind of more and more pressure onto the system. The system is able to grow and it's able to evolve. So it's a very important concept, and really kind of was a key driver for us in that world. Cool. So the last point that I want to kind of touch on here in this maturity journey is one around observability, right? It's great that you're producing all these events. It's great that you have kind of all this, kind of great supply chain with, immutable artifacts and all of it. But it will fall down if you're not able to observe your system. You'll just end up with, a ton of data. Your system may be underperforming. Your system may be, you don't really know, why does it cost us so much? Why does it take so long to push a change up into production? Or why are our customers complaining? Without observability, you have no kind of means to be able to look at that. And traditionally, when we look at kind of standalone or singular systems, it's really easy to do that. It's really easy to plug in a debugger, plug in some kind of level of like single process tracing and process execution, and get all the data that you need out of that. But more and more, and as kind of companies move to the cloud, these ephemeral workloads, they number in the thousands sometimes. So to be able to kind of have a single view of that, critically important. So really kind of like a 360-degree view on where your data sits, how it transits, and how and when the hows and whens of access to your customers' data. So this is a quote from James. I think it echoes kind of the perspective of the Node.js Foundation, is that improving diagnostics and observability of the Node.js platform is one of the top technical priorities for 2018, right? So it's not only kind of very important at the enterprise level, and folks are making big strides there. There's a lot of vendors in this space and whatnot, but the Node core community recognizes this and is really kind of putting a lot of their efforts into making this happen, and making it happen in ways that are respective to how modern workloads are built on top of Node. Cool. So observability is awesome. We understand kind of, how does it help development? How does it help operations? But how does it help you address your business partners, right? In the world of ephemeral cloud workloads, if you set out to document that topology, like I was saying before, you would probably never finish, right? Your system is changing at such a rapid rate of change as you add teams, as you add people, as you add capabilities. That becomes not feasible, right? So instead, the system should be able to self-organize, self-discover, and self-document, right? And this very much sits back into the realm of, kind of the event-driven architecture aspect. So given that our clients are benefiting from embracing, this fully observable and event-driven architecture, where we could trust the authenticity of the component artifacts, it really became trivial to enable the business with things like GDPR controls, things like audit and compliance and commercial licensing, right? So the first step was to provide, just like a specific example, touching back on GDPR. We implemented, I don't know if you guys are familiar with GDPR, but essentially global data privacy regulations, enacted and enforced by the European Union. But as companies are more and more global, these regulations have an impact really on most all companies, especially if their customers are around the world. It's more about the customers and not about where the company is. So the first step was to provide to the data privacy team a mapping of data access and customer data transit, as well as storage. Where is our data? How are people accessing our data? Where is all that? So we're able to do that, right? Check. The next step was to provide controls to access and either provide this data to a customer's request or remove the data from the client system fully. Right, again, event-driven architecture and observability allowed us to very naturally do that without having to invest a whole lot of additional R&D time to make that happen. So check again. And the last step was to provide our legal team and auditors with an immutable record, right? Something that they could trust, and they understood the provenance of that record, that we were able to fulfill our customers' requests, and that we were in compliance from a legal perspective, and that the data was actually provided or destroyed. So check again. So I think it's a really powerful example of not only kind of the amazing technologies and functionality and system services we can build with this, but how we can actually partner with the business through the same model. And that becomes really powerful when you're able to kind of consolidate on those things. So now that you have all your systems, from infrastructure to code changes, user interactions, and customer transactions, in a fully diagnosed and observable system, you must then ensure, kind of the last step is really ensuring that all these data streams, because again, it becomes kind of an NP hard kind of problem for a person to deal with. How do you discover all these data streams? How do you socialize this across the organization for consumption? And you really do that through a lot of kind of the traditional kind of domain-driven design type approaches, right? Data modeling, data governance, event contracts, pushing it out into chat flows, and other means of communication that your teams are most comfortable with. You can really kind of pick and choose exactly where you want to meet your users. There's really nothing prescriptive and no new systems that they have to learn to be able to kind of tap into these data streams and then take that across your business. So I want to thank you guys for your time. I want to thank City of Toronto. It's been fantastic to be here. And if anyone wants to kind of talk about it a little bit more, any of the folks from nearForm are right at the booth and back. And I think that's about it before lunch, right?
There's still one more.
Oh, still one more. Okay.
Thank you.